The night was calm and the streets were quiet. Streetlights cast a soft glow on the asphalt, reflecting off the shiny hood of a black sedan. Inside the car, the driver adjusted the rearview mirror and glanced at the clock. It was late, past 10, and he was tired from a long day at work. The roads were almost empty, but the rhythm of the city was still there. The distant hum of traffic, the occasional siren, and the faint sounds of people talking or walking along sidewalks. He had just finished a long meeting and now he was heading home. His mind wandered to simple things, the warm bed waiting for him, a cup of tea, maybe a quiet night of reading. He was someone who kept a low profile, focused on work, and cared deeply for his family and community. Driving through familiar streets, he felt a sense of calm, enjoying the solitude and the peace of the late hour. Up ahead, a patrol car sat on the side of the road, its lights off but ready. The officers inside had been on shift for hours. One of them stretched and rubbed his eyes, feeling the fatigue that came from long nights on the road. They were scanning the streets, looking for anything unusual, any small sign that someone might be breaking the law. Their job demanded vigilance, but sometimes their minds wandered, filled with assumptions and past experiences. They had seen many situations in the past, some calm and routine, others tense and dangerous. They knew the unpredictability of the night could change everything in a matter of seconds. As the black sedan passed by, one of the officers noticed the speed. It was just slightly above the limit, but enough to warrant a check. The officer's hand hovered over the radio, ready to call it in. He motioned to his partner, who nodded, understanding the decision. The patrol car's lights flicked on suddenly, red and blue cutting through the darkness like a sharp blade. The black sedan slowed and pulled over to the side, the driver's heart rate increasing slightly. It was a routine stop, he told himself, but there was a small knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. He reached for his license and registration, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel as the officers approached. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of asphalt and faint traces of nearby restaurants. The officers approached cautiously, their footsteps soft but deliberate. One officer tapped on the window, signaling the driver to roll it down. The driver complied, his movements careful and deliberate. "Good evening, officers," he said politely, trying to set a calm tone. His voice was steady, showing no anger or fear, just respect. "Evening," one officer replied. "Do you know why we stopped you?" "Yes, I believe I was a little over the speed limit." "I apologize for that," the driver said. His tone was sincere, acknowledging the minor mistake without argument. The officers nodded, taking in the driver's response. They requested his license and registration, and he handed them over without hesitation. As the officers went back to their car to run his information, the driver sat quietly, observing the night. He noticed the faint reflection of the city lights on the dashboard, the way the air smelled slightly different near a hot food cart on the corner. His mind tried to stay calm, reminding himself that he had done nothing wrong beyond a small speeding error. Inside the patrol car, the officers exchanged glances. Their fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, typing in the information and waiting for the system to respond. One officer let out a quiet sigh, stretching his shoulders. "Another routine stop," he muttered, more to himself than to his partner. His partner, focused on the screen, nodded, but his eyes kept darting back to the sedan. There was a sense of alertness, a subtle tension in the air. They were trained to be cautious, especially during nighttime stops, but there was also an undercurrent of unspoken assumptions. The driver noticed the subtle change in their posture and tone. He kept his hands visible, sitting straight, maintaining a respectful demeanor. He knew that how he carried himself could influence the situation, that patience and calmness were his allies. He thought briefly about the stories he had heard, the experiences of others who had faced stops like this, and he tried to remain as composed as possible. Minutes passed in a quiet rhythm. The night continued around them, with the occasional distant sound of a car or a dog barking. The officers checked his records, confirming the basics. License valid, no outstanding warrants, clean driving record. Yet in the silence between taps on the keyboard and soft murmurs, the tension lingered. It was invisible but palpable, a reminder of the dynamics that often went unnoticed in routine stops. Finally, one officer looked up, eyes meeting the driver's. "Everything seems fine here," he said. trying to balance authority with reassurance. His voice was professional, but there was a trace of the unease that had been there since they first saw the car. The driver nodded politely. "Thank you, officers. I appreciate your work and your caution. I'll be more mindful of my speed." The officers returned his documents, the lights on their patrol car reflecting briefly on the hood of the sedan. "Drive safely," one of them said, and the other added, "Have a good night." As the driver pulled back onto the road, a sense of relief washed over him. The encounter had been routine, but the awareness of the subtle tension, the unspoken assumptions had stayed with him. He merged back into the quiet streets, resuming his journey home, reflecting on the strange combination of respect, caution, and subtle anxiety that had defined the stop. The officers watched him go, each lost in thought. They had seen countless cars that night. Many stopped for minor infractions, but this one lingered in their minds for reasons they could not yet articulate. It was a reminder of the unpredictability of their job, the complexity of human interaction, and the need to balance caution with fairness. The night continued, indifferent to the lessons being quietly absorbed on a small stretch of city street, where a simple stop had already begun to reveal something deeper about assumptions, perceptions, and respect. The driver's mind shifted back to home, imagining the warmth of his living room, the soft glow of lamps, the quiet comfort of familiar surroundings. The streets around him seemed calmer now, more familiar, and he allowed himself to exhale fully, releasing the tension that had built up. The encounter, though minor, had reminded him of patience and composure, of maintaining dignity even in moments of uncertainty. He knew that life sometimes placed people in situations where they had little control, but their response could shape the outcome. The patrol car remained parked for a while, the officers making notes in their log, their minds reflecting on what had just occurred. There was no dramatic conclusion, no confrontation, just a small incident that carried a quiet weight. It was a moment that would later be remembered not for the speeding, not for the check of papers, but for the subtle lessons it had brought, about perception, about caution, and about the shared humanity that often went unnoticed in fleeting interactions. As the driver disappeared around the corner, the night seemed to settle into its natural rhythm again. Streetlights flickered softly, the hum of distant traffic continued, and the world moved forward. Yet in the quiet, both the driver and the officers carried with them a reminder of how simple moments, small encounters, could hold profound meaning, shaping awareness, empathy, and understanding in ways that only time would fully reveal. The driver took a deep breath, trying to let go of the tension from the stop. He had obeyed every instruction, stayed calm, and treated the officers with respect. Now, as he continued driving, he thought about how strange it was to feel nervous during a routine part of life, something so ordinary as getting pulled over. The street was dimly lit, and the glow from the traffic lights made the asphalt shine, reflecting the calm rhythm of the city at night. He drove carefully, aware of the silence around him, and letting his thoughts wander to the events that led him here. Meanwhile, the officers returned to their car, running his license and registration through the system. One of them typed quickly, glancing at the screen, while the other leaned back slightly, trying to shake off the subtle tension that lingered. They exchanged small words, trying to make sense of the ordinary night suddenly feeling heavier than usual. "Looks clean so far," one officer muttered, almost as if saying it aloud would confirm it. His partner nodded, fingers tapping the keyboard, but his eyes never left the sedan parked on the side of the road. They had seen many drivers in their years, some calm, some tense, but something about this one caught their attention. The driver, unaware of the thoughts racing through the officers' minds, focused on keeping the mood respectful. He knew that in moments like this, perception mattered as much as action. Even small gestures, the tone of voice, or simple eye contact could influence how events unfolded. He thought about all the times he had driven at night, the quiet streets, the occasional need to pull over, and how each time was slightly different. Tonight had started as just another drive home, but it had become more a lesson in patience, awareness, and composure. He remembered advice he had received long ago from a mentor about staying calm during unexpected situations. It had seemed simple back then, almost too simple, but now he understood the weight of those words. Patience, clarity, and respect could diffuse tension before it grew, creating a space where misunderstandings had less power. He thought about his family, about the moments waiting for him at home, and the feeling of responsibility to model patience and composure no matter the circumstance. Back in the patrol car, one officer continued reviewing the information that came up. The quiet hum of the dashboard filled the space, interrupted occasionally by soft clicks and beeps from the computer system. The other officer was more alert, watching the driver with careful eyes, noting his calm posture, his composed expressions. There was a sense of cautious observation, a balance between duty and the subtle weight of assumptions that were hard to ignore. In their training, they had been told to always stay alert, but they had also been warned against letting biases cloud their judgment. Still, in those few moments of waiting, human tendencies crept in. The mind filled in blanks, made predictions, and sometimes underestimated the power of appearances. The driver noticed a shift in the officer's tone when they spoke among themselves. It was subtle, a small change in cadence, a softer delivery, almost unintentional. He realized that sometimes the weight of assumptions, unspoken but deeply ingrained, could surface in even the most professional settings. Yet he kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, his posture calm and his voice steady. He knew that remaining composed was not just about following instructions. It was a way to communicate respect and understanding without words. Minutes passed. The night stretched quietly around them, with distant sounds of the city. The low rumble of buses, the faint clatter of shoes on pavement, and the occasional barking of a dog. The driver watched the lights in the distance, reflecting on how different life could seem depending on perspective. From the officer's viewpoint, he was just another driver, another car stopped for a minor infraction. From his viewpoint, this encounter carried layers of subtle tension and human complexity, highlighting the delicate balance between authority and personal dignity. He also thought about the stories he had heard from friends and colleagues, about encounters that had not gone well. Those stories were warnings and lessons, reminders that the smallest actions, the tone of voice, and the choice to stay calm could shape outcomes. He understood that while the officers had a duty to maintain order, he also had a role in navigating the situation carefully, ensuring respect and patience guided the interaction. He felt a quiet strength in the way he maintained his composure, realizing that control over one's response was as powerful as any authority exercised over him. Inside the patrol car, the officers completed the checks and discussed among themselves. They spoke in low voices, reflecting on the driver's calm behavior and how different it was from what they might have expected. Their conversation was candid, honest, tinged with awareness of the assumptions they had carried without even noticing. One officer remarked quietly, almost to himself, that appearances could be misleading, that the calm demeanor of the driver was a reminder of the importance of fairness and perspective. It was not a dramatic realization, but a subtle acknowledgement of the human complexity present in even routine stops. The driver remained patient, watching the subtle interplay of actions from a distance. He understood that human interactions were often layered, shaped by assumptions, experiences, and unconscious biases. He felt a sense of empathy, recognizing that the officers were doing their job under the pressures of vigilance and responsibility, yet he also held space for his own dignity and the right to be treated fairly. It was a delicate balance, one that required awareness and patience from both sides. As the officers returned to the driver's car, the documents ready, there was a brief pause in the air. Both sides understood that this moment, though routine, carried weight. The driver's demeanor, his calmness and his respectful engagement had already set a tone that shifted the interaction in subtle ways. The officers approached with caution, but also with a hint of acknowledgement that the situation was unfolding differently than anticipated. The driver handed over any remaining documents, his movement steady and unhurried. "I appreciate your time and your caution tonight," he said politely, hoping to communicate respect and understanding. His words were simple, yet they carried a quiet strength, a reminder that kindness and composure could guide interactions in meaningful ways. The officers exchanged a glance, then returned the documents with a nod. "Thank you," one said. "Drive safely." The other added, "Have a good night." There was no tension in their tone now, just professional courtesy and a hint of reflection. The driver felt relief but also a quiet sense of accomplishment. Not because the stop was over, but because the interaction had remained respectful, human, and composed. As he merged back onto the road, The driver reflected on the encounter. He thought about how quickly assumptions could form, how subtle biases could shape perceptions, and how composure, patience, and respect could change the energy of even a potentially tense situation. The streets were quiet again, bathed in the gentle glow of the city lights, and he allowed himself to exhale fully. The encounter had been brief, but its lessons were lasting, a reminder of humanity, patience, and the importance of treating everyone with fairness and dignity. He drove home slowly, feeling the night's rhythm around him. The encounter with the officers remained present in his thoughts, not as a source of fear, but as a reflection on human interaction and awareness. The night carried its usual calm, the city's quiet hum offering a sense of continuity and stability. Yet beneath that calm was a lesson, unspoken but profound, about patience, respect, and the subtle ways that everyday encounters shaped understanding. The officers, still parked nearby, completed their paperwork and prepared for the rest of their shift. Their minds, too, carried the quiet reflection of the encounter, a reminder of how assumptions could be challenged, how appearances might be deceiving, and how respect and fairness mattered deeply in the work they did. The night continued with its usual rhythm, but both sides carried with them a small, powerful understanding about human connection and awareness. The night continued as the driver made his way through the quiet streets. He was still reflecting on the stop, thinking about the subtle tension, the way small gestures could carry so much weight, and how calm composure could shape interactions. The hum of the engine and the gentle glow of the streetlights became a steady rhythm, allowing him to think clearly. He had always believed that life was made up of small moments, brief encounters that could carry lessons far beyond their apparent importance. This night was one such moment, and he felt that it had already left a mark. Meanwhile, back in the patrol car, the officers were reviewing the driver's records once more. One officer leaned closer to the screen, noticing details that made him pause. His eyes widened slightly, and he signaled to his partner to look at the information. The other officer leaned over, squinting at the display, and there was a long, silent moment as they both absorbed what they were seeing. The names, the affiliations, the accomplishments — it was someone significant, someone who had made a positive impact on the community in ways they had not realized. Both officers were momentarily speechless, a rare pause in the rhythm of routine. The driver, still unaware, continued down the street. He thought about the night's calm, about the city that had softened around him, and about the strange combination of tension and respect that had defined the stop. In the past, he had encountered situations where assumptions overshadowed reality, and he had learned to navigate them with patience and dignity. He knew that people often made judgments based on appearances, sometimes without even realizing it, and he understood that such moments were opportunities to remind others of the humanity in every interaction. Inside the patrol car, the officers exchanged a few quiet words. One said, almost in disbelief, "I didn't expect it. I had no idea." The other nodded, the weight of their assumption suddenly apparent. They realized that their perspective had been shaped by unconscious biases, that the calm demeanor of the driver had challenged their initial thoughts without them even noticing. There was a quiet recognition that respect and fairness mattered deeply, that appearances could be misleading, and that their job required both vigilance and open-mindedness. The computer screen reflected the driver's identity, and the officers felt a mix of surprise, admiration, and self-awareness. They began to understand that in their daily work, every interaction held potential lessons, not just about procedure, but about humanity, perception, and fairness. Their minds traced back to the stop itself, replaying the moments when the driver had remained composed, respectful, and cooperative. Each small gesture, each calm word, now seemed to carry a significance they had not fully appreciated in the moment. The driver approached a quieter part of the city, where the lights were dimmer and the streets almost empty. He thought about how life sometimes presented unexpected lessons, often in the most ordinary moments. A routine stop, a simple interaction, had revealed something deeper, a subtle reflection on assumptions, on patience, and on understanding the unseen dimensions of people's lives. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction in having maintained his composure, understanding that his behavior had shaped the interaction as much as the officers' actions. Back in the patrol car, the officers were still processing the information. They glanced at each other, sharing a wordless acknowledgement of what they had just learned. There was a mixture of respect for the driver and self-reflection, an awareness of how easily assumptions could mislead even the most trained professionals. They considered how many other stops had played out in similar ways, moments where appearances had suggested one thing while reality was quite different. It was a sobering thought, and one that reminded them of the responsibility they carried in every encounter. The driver continued, his mind gradually shifting back to home. He reflected on the lessons of the night, not with anger or frustration, but with a calm awareness. He thought about the people he encountered every day, the potential for misunderstanding, and the power of patience and respect to bridge gaps. He felt a sense of quiet strength, knowing that maintaining composure was not just about following instructions, it was about asserting dignity, about quietly shaping the energy of an interaction, and about reminding others of the humanity present in every moment. As he drove through familiar neighborhoods, the driver recalled stories from his past, moments where similar assumptions had been made, and how he had navigated them. Each memory reinforced the value of patience, empathy, and self-control. He realized that while he could not control the assumptions of others, he could control his own responses, and that sometimes the smallest action spoke louder than words. In the patrol car, the officers had completed the check and confirmed all details. One leaned back, rubbing his temples, reflecting on how the night's routine stop had shifted into something far more meaningful. They had encountered many drivers over the years, but this one had quietly reminded them of the importance of humility, awareness, and fairness. It was a lesson not just about protocol, but about humanity. A reminder that everyone deserved to be seen for who they truly were, not for the assumptions others might carry. The driver, approaching the final stretch before his home, felt a sense of calm settle over him. The encounter, though brief, had left a lasting impression. He thought about how easily assumptions could form, and how composure, respect, and patience could quietly change the nature of an interaction. The night around him was still, filled with the soft hum of distant traffic and the gentle glow of city lights. It was ordinary, yet in its ordinariness lay a profound lesson, one that he carried with quiet strength. The officers watched the sedan leave their line of sight. There was a shared understanding between them, an acknowledgement that the night had brought an unexpected insight. They had been reminded that appearances were not always truthful indicators, that patience and fairness were essential, and that every human interaction held layers of complexity. The quiet moments of reflection, the small gestures of respect, and the calm composure of the driver had shifted the tone in ways they would not soon forget. The driver parked near his home, the familiar surroundings offering a comforting sense of stability. He thought about the night, about the subtle lessons embedded in a routine stop, and about the quiet strength that came from maintaining dignity and composure. Life, he realized, was filled with such moments, small but powerful, moments that revealed character, humanity, and the importance of treating others with fairness and respect. As he stepped out of the car, the cool night air touched his face, and he felt a deep sense of calm, ready to leave the lessons of the evening behind as he entered the warmth and familiarity of home. The driver had reached a quieter street now, one lined with small trees and softly lit lampposts. His thoughts were calm yet reflective. He replayed the stop in his mind, analyzing every movement, every word spoken. It was strange how a simple traffic stop could carry so much weight, how it could make someone pause and think deeply about society, assumptions, and human behavior. He understood that the officers were only doing their job, but he also realized how easily assumptions could shape perceptions, even in routine situations. Meanwhile, the patrol car remained parked for a few minutes as the officers processed the discovery they had made about the driver. They exchanged quiet words, still a bit astonished. One officer muttered almost to himself, "I can't believe it." The other nodded, reflecting on the gap between the image they had initially perceived and the reality now before them. They had expected a routine stop, nothing extraordinary, and suddenly they were faced with a profound lesson about assumptions and awareness. The driver noticed the patrol car was still there and saw the officers glancing his way, a hint of surprise in their expressions. He remained composed, hands on the wheel, posture straight and calm. He understood that their behavior had shifted, that they had realized something about him, and he chose to respond with quiet dignity. Sometimes, he thought, people needed to confront their own assumptions. and all one could do was remain patient and composed. He began speaking softly, almost as if to ease the tension, though not expecting a response. "It's easy to make quick judgments," he said quietly to himself. "But everyone has a story. Everyone has something more than what meets the eye." He smiled slightly, feeling the truth of his words. The night air carried his quiet reflection, the hum of distant cars adding rhythm to his thoughts. Life often placed people in situations where their judgments were tested, where patience and composure mattered more than quick reactions. He had learned that over the years, through many small experiences that built his sense of perspective. The officers were still discussing quietly. "I didn't expect this at all," one said. "We should never judge anyone so quickly." His partner nodded, reflecting on the subtle ways they had assumed things based on appearance and context. The night had become more than a routine stop. It was now a lesson in humility and awareness. The officers realized that their work required not just attention to detail and procedure, but also an understanding of human complexity. Each driver, each interaction, had the potential to teach something about respect, fairness, and the assumptions that guided their actions. The driver, sensing the shift, kept his calm demeanor. He understood that awareness and patience could change the energy of a situation, could soften tension and remind others of the humanity in every interaction. He had seen many instances where assumptions led to unnecessary conflict, and he had learned to navigate those situations with composure. Tonight was another example, and he felt a quiet sense of satisfaction that his behavior had maintained respect, dignity, and calm. As he drove slowly, taking in the quiet streets, he thought about how rare such moments of self-reflection could be for everyone involved. He understood the pressures the officers faced, the long hours, the need for vigilance, the constant uncertainty of their work. At the same time, he recognized the importance of balancing that vigilance with fairness and awareness, of seeing people for who they truly were rather than what assumptions might suggest. The patrol car remained nearby, the officers quietly acknowledging the weight of the encounter. Their minds were busy with reflection, considering how many times assumptions had shaped their perceptions and actions. They realized that the driver had provided a subtle but powerful reminder of why empathy, patience, and fairness were critical, even in routine stops. They had been challenged to consider perspectives they might have overlooked, to understand that appearances could be misleading, and to see the humanity in every encounter. The driver thought about the lessons of the night and the ways in which small moments could have a lasting impact. He remembered times in his life when assumptions had been made about him and how he had responded with patience and dignity. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his calm approach had created a space for reflection, for learning, for awareness. Life often required composure, he realized, and tonight had been a clear example of that principle in action. As the driver approached a slightly busier street, he noticed the lights of nearby stores and the faint sounds of life continuing around him. The city carried on in its usual rhythm, unaware of the small but meaningful lesson that had unfolded on a quiet street just moments before. The driver felt a connection to the larger flow of life, recognizing that these small moments, these brief encounters, carried significance beyond what anyone could immediately see. They shaped understanding, awareness, and the way people interacted with one another. Inside the patrol car, the officers reflected on how quickly their perspective had shifted. They had gone from seeing a routine stop to experiencing a profound reminder of the importance of fairness and awareness. They discussed quietly how assumptions could influence interactions, how unconscious biases could shape perceptions, and how patience and respect could alter the course of a situation. They realized that the driver had demonstrated qualities that went beyond mere compliance with instructions. He had shown composure, dignity, and awareness that subtly educated them in ways they had not expected. The driver continued on his route, the city now becoming more familiar as he neared his neighborhood. He thought about how he could carry these lessons forward in his own life, not just in similar encounters but in everyday interactions. Respect, patience, and understanding were not just principles for moments of tension. They were values that shaped how people lived and interacted with one another. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that this night, with its unexpected lessons, had strengthened his understanding of human interaction. The officers finally prepared to leave the scene, their minds filled with reflection. They had been reminded that every stop, Every encounter carried lessons beyond the immediate circumstances. The driver had quietly taught them about patience, about dignity, and about the unseen layers that existed within each person. As they drove away, they carried the subtle awareness of the evening with them, a reminder that respect and fairness were essential in every interaction, and that appearances could never tell the full story. The driver reached the familiar streets of his neighborhood, the warm glow of homes and streetlights providing comfort and familiarity. He parked his car and sat for a moment, reflecting on the journey of the night. The stop had been brief, the interaction simple, yet the impact was profound. He realized that life was filled with such moments, small yet powerful. Moments that revealed character, humanity, and the importance of understanding. He felt gratitude for the calm he had maintained, for the lessons imparted, and for the quiet reminder of patience and dignity that had guided the evening. As he stepped out of the car, the cool night air filled his lungs and he felt a sense of closure and reflection. The city around him continued its rhythm, the distant sounds of life carrying on. But the small lessons of the evening remained with him. He thought about how patience and respect could influence even the most ordinary interactions, how calm composure could shape outcomes, and how awareness of assumptions could transform perspectives. The night had been ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in its subtle teaching. It was a reminder that humanity and understanding existed in every moment, and that even a simple encounter could carry a lasting impact. The next morning, the driver woke up feeling a calm clarity he had not expected. The night had been ordinary in appearance, yet it carried a subtle weight that lingered in his mind. He thought about the officers, the brief interaction, and how quickly assumptions had formed and then been challenged. It was a reminder that life often presented small but important lessons, and that even the simplest interactions could leave a lasting impression on everyone involved. As he prepared for the day, he thought about the subtle power of patience and composure. A simple stop on a quiet street had turned into a profound reflection on fairness, respect, and human understanding. He realized that these qualities were not only important in moments of tension, but also in everyday life. How one treated colleagues, neighbors, or strangers could shape relationships and perceptions. Maintaining dignity, he understood, was as much about self-respect as it was about influencing the way others saw and reacted to you. Meanwhile, the officers returned to the precinct, their minds still reflecting on the previous night. They shared their thoughts quietly with colleagues, discussing how easy it was to make assumptions based on appearances and context. One officer said, "We almost judged him before knowing who he really was." The other nodded, adding, "It's a reminder that everyone has a story, and we have to be careful not to let assumptions guide our actions." Their conversation was thoughtful, honest, and introspective. The night's encounter had subtly shifted their awareness, reminding them that their role required not just attention to procedure, but also empathy and fairness. The driver went about his day, but the memory of the stop stayed with him. He found himself reflecting on small moments in life that often went unnoticed, the way people carried themselves, the way they responded to unexpected situations, and the subtle ways kindness and composure could influence outcomes. He thought about the lessons from the night, that appearances were not the full story, that patience could diffuse tension, and that respect could create understanding even in brief encounters. In the afternoon, he received a message from a friend who had heard about the incident through the community. People were talking about how quickly the stop had shifted from routine to meaningful, about the reminder it provided regarding assumptions and fairness. The driver responded simply, emphasizing that the real lesson was about awareness and patience, about understanding people as more than what was visible at first glance. He felt a quiet satisfaction that the interaction, though brief, had sparked reflection beyond just himself and the officers involved. Later, the officers discussed the situation during a break. One admitted that the stop had made him rethink how he approached interactions with people. "I didn't realize how easily we fall into bias," he said. His partner nodded, reflecting on the same realization. They both understood that their training and vigilance were important, but so was fairness and awareness of human complexity. The night's experience would stay with them, quietly shaping the way they approached future stops. Interactions and judgments. The driver, returning home that evening, thought about how small actions could ripple into larger lessons. Driving through familiar streets, he considered how empathy, respect, and composure were qualities that could quietly influence the world. The memory of the officer's reactions, the subtle shift in tone when they realized who he was, reminded him that assumptions could be challenged, and awareness could grow from even brief encounters. He arrived home and stepped inside, greeted by the warmth and familiarity of his space. The night's lesson lingered in his mind, a gentle reminder of how humanity, dignity, and understanding mattered in every interaction. He reflected on how appearances were only one part of a story, and that respect and composure could reveal deeper truths about both the self and others. Even ordinary moments, he realized, could carry profound significance if approached thoughtfully. The officers returned to their patrol that night, carrying the memory of the stop with them. Each driver they encountered afterward was seen with a slightly different perspective, a reminder to balance vigilance with awareness, to treat every person with fairness and respect. The night had reminded them that their role required more than procedure. It required understanding, empathy, and acknowledgement of the humanity present in every interaction. The experience would quietly shape the way they approached their work, teaching them that lessons could come from the most unexpected places. The driver spent the next few days reflecting on the incident. He thought about how quickly tension could build and how small actions could diffuse it. He realized that in many ways life was full of moments like this where patience, composure, and understanding mattered far more than the immediate circumstances. Every encounter, no matter how brief, carried the potential for reflection, learning, and connection. He appreciated the reminder, understanding that dignity and respect were always worth maintaining, even when they might seem unnoticed. Back at the precinct, the officers shared the story with colleagues in hushed tones, careful to focus on the lessons rather than the fame of the individual involved. They discussed how the interaction highlighted the importance of empathy, fairness, and awareness of unconscious bias. The conversation was thoughtful, reflective, and meant to improve their approach in the future. It was a reminder that policing was not only about enforcement, but also about understanding and human connection. The driver continued his life, carrying the quiet lessons of the night with him. He thought about his family, friends, and community, realizing that the principles he practiced during the stop, patience, composure, and dignity, were relevant in every aspect of life. Small actions, he reflected, could ripple outward, influencing others in ways that might never be seen directly. The night had reminded him that maintaining humanity and awareness was always important, no matter the situation. As weeks passed, the story of the encounter quietly spread in the community. People discussed it as an example of how quick assumptions could be misleading and how calm, respectful behavior could create understanding. The driver rarely spoke about it directly, preferring to let the lesson remain in the background, influencing thoughts and actions subtly. For him, the real significance lay not in recognition but in the awareness and reflection it inspired, both in himself and in those who had been involved. The officers, too, reflected often on that night. Whenever they conducted stops, they recalled the driver's calm composure and respectful demeanor, reminding themselves to approach every encounter with fairness and empathy. The lesson had become a quiet part of their consciousness, shaping their decisions and interactions. They understood that policing was not only about rules and enforcement, but also about humanity, understanding and careful awareness of the stories each individual carried. The driver, walking home one evening after work, thought about the ripple effects of small moments.